PR Connections Radio presents.
Welcome to Vegas Hockey Hub here on PRConnectionsRadio.com, the voice of new media. I'm your host, Ian Kelly, and on this episode, we are going to be doing a newer type of episode, and we're going to be going outside the Vegas Golden Knights, but staying inside the NHL, as we're going to be discussing who are not the worst team, not the second worst, not the third worst, not the fourth worst, but we're going to be talking about who are the worst teams in the NHL for 2024-2025, and essentially going to be telling you who, in your host Ian Kelly's opinion, who are the 5 worst teams in this season, 2024-2025. And I do want to, before we break down those 5 teams, I want to give an honorable mention very quickly. Because, look, there's going to be 2 teams in the Golden Knights division that kind of inspired this video to be happening. There's one team out there in the Central, and then you have one team from the Metro and one team from the Atlantic. But overall, there is one team that is an honorable mention, a team that we could have put in the top 5, but we excluded them because I actually see them doing a little bit tad better than what a bottom 5 team will be. And that organization that I don't think is going to be in the bottom 5 is going to be this team right here. Now, I know for the longest time there has been always, this laughs and giggles about, hey, this team has been on a horrid playoff drought. This kind of team has been stuck just in neutral, trying to rebuild, trying to get new stars, trying to get assets. But I'm excluding the Buffalo Sabres from the bottom 5 because they have just enough talent. And we actually did a video a few months back explaining how the Buffalo Sabres are actually trending in the right direction. So basing it off of not just that video, but heading into, what we're seeing right here, right now, they are not a great team. All right. The Buffalo Sabres do not look like on paper they're going to be a great team at all. However, this is a Buffalo Sabres team that has enough talent to end up being better than the 5 worst in the NHL. So the Buffalo Sabres are going to be an honorable mention on this show when it comes to the worst teams in the NHL. Consider it the HM of this category. And before I break down those 5 teams, go to www.prconnectionsradio.com, voice of new media. Over a dozen shows on the platform, so I recommend checking out all of the shows we have on here, including Vegas Hockey Hub. Follow us on social media. I'm on all major platforms at Vegas Hockey Hub. And if you want to follow your host, I am at IANJRACHIELE. So getting into this list and really getting into the categories and everything that's going on here, I'm going to be kind of looking at and exploring the 5 worst teams out there in the NHL. And we're going to be starting out with an organization that I don't understand why you're still here. Like, you have had bottom 5 pick after bottom 5 pick. You've had some generational talents. You have some really good players on your organization. But this Anaheim Ducks team just really looks like they aren't breaking past that bottom 5 tier. I don't know if it's the goaltending and them refusing to let go of John Gibson. Hey, John Gibson was a great goalie a couple of years ago. I understand that. He also has the most losses by a goaltender in Vegas Golden Knights history. But when it comes to John Gibson, yes, he was good a few years back, but it feels like you're just holding on to him because of that nostalgia. Lucas Dostal, a really young, up-and-coming goaltender, but I don't think that he is an established guy yet. I think 1 or 2 years down the road, maybe he will become in his prime that established goaltender you can use to make a playoff run. I mean, Anaheim Ducks organization defensively, you have some veterans, some established, experienced veterans on your roster, But at this point, do you really need that many experienced defensemen on your roster? Guys in their mid to late 30s. For example, Radko Gudas, when you signed him in free agency a while back, it seemed like a smart move, right? Like you have all these young guys coming up. All right, you got a veteran that's going to be there. But let's not forget, Cam Fowler has been a long-time Anaheim Duck, and they've had him around forever. But he's an established defenseman as well. So I really don't know what the makeup of this team is. I'm kind of confused by the thought process. It's like, okay, so we have a bunch of these older veterans on the team. They have some on the forwards as well. But you also have an influx of young guys in your middle six forwards. You have some prospects in the minors in San Diego and juniors that are trying to develop and get themselves back up and into the NHL level. So is the problem coaching? Well, I mean, I know Dallas Eakins was not, one of the greatest things ever, but then, you moved on. You're trying to get new leadership, new head coaching. So for the Anaheim Ducks, I actually sit here with more of a confused statement than it is an assertive statement because, yeah, they are a bottom 5 team in the NHL, but it really feels like the last 3 or 4 years they should have been making progress and growing as an organization, but it just seems like they're kind of just stuck in this bottomless tier of where they are right now. I mean, Trevor Zegras had a really solid start to his career, but it looks like he hasn't just flatlined. He's starting to regress a little bit. I mean, some positives I do want to point out is, Frank Vetrano, he is a really good player. In fact, he's one of the standout guys. Him and Strome are two really good players, but they're kind of in that veteran tier as well. They've been in the NHL for a couple of years. Those are the veterans you have on the roster that are really helping those guys out. You have McTavish, you have Carlson. There's some young guys in the wings. But when is Anaheim finally going to get out of being in the bottom 5 and having a top 5 pick in the draft lottery? Because this team should be talented enough and should be good enough to be there. It just doesn't seem like there's something clicking. It just seems like there's one little piece that needs to come together before Anaheim becomes a respectable team where they're in the middle of the pack in the Pacific Division and then eventually making it to the playoffs out there in Anaheim. I see the talent. I see the upcoming stuff that's happening there. It just really seems like the Anaheim Ducks are just missing something, and I kind of hope they find it. So at number 5 is the Anaheim Ducks, but it's unfortunate that it's the Anaheim Ducks that are at number 5. I kind of wish they weren't on here, but they are. So that is at number 5 when we're talking about the worst teams in the NHL for 2024-2025. So moving over from the Anaheim Ducks, getting into number 4, and this is an organization that, man, ever since 2020 has just been going down and down and down. And it really doesn't seem like the amount of young talent they have on their roster are clicking at all, despite the statistics. Like, if you look at the stat sheet, their 3 young players seem like they should be setting up the Montreal Canadiens for long-term success. But this is an organization that I just don't see any redeeming qualities for 24-25. This is a Montreal Canadiens team that, Kent Hughes as general manager, he took over. This was a guy that's had some responsibilities the last couple of years. I haven't really been impressed with a lot of the moves that Kent Hughes has made in Montreal. Hopefully I'm wrong, by the way. When it comes to Kent Hughes, hopefully his future plans become so great that Montreal becomes great again. I hope that for Montreal. But I have not really been impressed with what Kent Hughes has done the past few seasons as general manager ever since he took over. You also have the head coach and former hockey legend, Martin St. Louis. And it's kind of hard to get a gauge on how he has performed as a head coach because of just how the Montreal Canadiens have done. Because of how performing-wise Montreal has looked on the stat sheet, it's kind of hard to sit there and say, has he been a success? Has he been a failure? Has he just kind of just been an average, average meh head coach? Like, it's kind of hard to say when it comes to Martin St. Louis, because anyone who grew up in my era, I'm Gen Z, by the way, anyone who grew up in my era, we remember the Martin St. Louis playing with the Tampa Bay Lightning, playing alongside Vincent LeCavier, playing alongside Brad Richards. Like, that was the era I grew up with, even later with Steven Stamkos during his later years in Tampa Bay. And then his run in New York when they traded him over there and tried to help them win a Stanley Cup. So when it comes to Martin St. Louis, we know what he did as a player, but as a coach, it's kind of hard to sit there and say, all right, is it really his fault, or is it the organization as a whole? And speaking of the talent on the team, yes, I know that all the people out there in Montreal who aren't yelling at me in French and aren't speaking to me in French, the ones who speak English, yes, the ones in Montreal, you're going to bring up Cole Caulfield, you're going to bring up Nick Suzuki. I understand that you're going to bring up the, Justin Barron, you're going to bring up Samuel Montembeault. Like, there is, yes, some really good talent in Montreal, but it's top heavy. The Montreal Canadiens roster has Lane Hudson, who looks, by the way, as a promising rookie. All right? Lane Hudson, if he becomes what some people think could be advertised, he will be Rookie of the Year candidate out there in Montreal. Lane Hudson, I've seen his tape. I've seen what he did in juniors. I've seen some of the stuff that he did before getting to Montreal. He seems like a really good talent. I have no doubt about that. So with Lane Hudson joining this team, the young talent should be persevering at some point. But unfortunately, I have to point this out. Something is going wrong with this team. The goaltending kind of seems like it's hit and miss at times. Sometimes the goaltending looks pretty solid for a few games, and then they'll have like a 4 or 5 game stretch where it's, 4 goals, 5 goals, 4 goals, 6 goals, 4 goals, and they're losing games back to back to back. And then you have some games where Montembeault looks like somebody who actually could be a franchise goalie, and he only lets up a goal here, the occasional shutout here, a solid 2-goal letting up performance, but he had about 35 saves. So for the Montreal Canadiens, I really look here and go, similar to Anaheim at number 5, is it an organization issue? Is it a front office issue? Is it a head coaching issue? Is it a lack of, overall talent when it comes to the bottom 6, when it comes to your bottom pairings? Like, what's the issue in Montreal? Because Nick Suzuki has been your all-star. You're welcome, by the way, being from Vegas. You're welcome. But when it comes to Nick Suzuki, he has become a solidified talent. He's a generational all-star in Montreal. Cole Caulfield has become what he was advertised. But where's the rest of the roster? So overall, when it comes to Montreal, I kind of hope that this organization can turn it around at some point, because it wasn't just a couple of years ago they were in the Stanley Cup Finals as the Western Conference representative after they beat the Vegas Golden Knights and went to the Stanley Cup Finals just to lose to Tampa Bay. But when it comes to Montreal, I kind of hope that someday we find them in a certain area of time, because this team's talented enough to do it. But there's just something missing. I wish we knew what that was. Now, before moving over to number 3 on our list, I just want to remind everybody, number 5 was the Anaheim Ducks, all right? Number 4, who we just recently went over, Montreal Canadiens. And then at number 3, we're talking about the worst teams in the NHL for 24-25. And I'm not going to sit here and say that this is self-explanatory, but let's just be brutally honest here. You're kind of expecting this. The Columbus Blue Jackets organization, really ever since they had that magical playoff run when you had Panarin, you had Duchesne, you had Bob. Like, this was a Columbus Blue Jackets team that has kind of just done this ever since 2019. And with Columbus, you have young talent. I'm not going to sit here and say you don't. You have maybe one or two all-stars on the team. Based off of what I'm looking at, you have a top 6 forward that could be an all-star. Defensively, if he stays healthy, I think Werenski could be an all-star. But this team has an influx of so many aging veterans. I mean, you almost have, 38-year-old Jack Johnson? You brought over James Van Riemsdyk, who's in his mid-30s now. Sean Monahan in his 30s now. He's over there. I kind of understand why he's there. But Sean Monahan, he's there. Eric Branson as a, alternate captain type of guy, he'll be there. I just kind of sit here and go, all right, Don Waddle, you're over there now. You were, out there in Carolina for a little bit. You've been an established general manager for a bunch of teams before. You kind of been hired to be brought in and right the ship in Columbus. But it's going to take a while. This is a team that brought in Provorov, and I think that kind of was a little bit of a mistake because Provorov hasn't really done as what I thought that he was going to do as a defenseman. Goaltending-wise, this is an organization that kind of just seems like they're just in the average tier when it comes to goaltending performance. Dean Evison, you brought him in to be the head coach after the absolute misery and the botching that you had about 18 months ago with your head coaching hire. Shout out to him, by the way. Should have never been hired back in the first place. But when it comes to Columbus Blue Jackets organization, it just really seems like they have really no infrastructure. They have 6 or 7 established veterans, and then you have 5 or 6 young guys who are just not ready yet. And then in that sandwich in the middle, you have 2 or 3 guys in their prime, but they're being overshadowed by the aging veterans and by the young upcoming guys. And hopefully Columbus, maybe it'll be 3 or 4 years or 5 years down the road, they can fix the ship and correct it. But sadly, this has been the Columbus Blue Jackets for the longest time. I mean, even dating back to the Rick Nash era, where, they had 1 or 2 years of making the playoffs, and then they had to start selling off assets. They had to trade Rick Nash himself, sent him to another organization. Then they started rebuilding for a little bit. When you did trade for a Tammy Panarin, you traded, you went out and got Sergei Bobrovsky, and you were good for maybe 2 or 3 years, and then you had to rebuild again. So I don't know what the long-term future is in Columbus, but it's just a really sad situation to look at because you have 1 or 2 really good players in Columbus, but the rest of the roster kind of shakes my head wondering what your goal is moving forward. I just don't really understand what you're trying to accomplish. So for Don Waddle, by the way, I wish you the best of luck with this in this situation. Hopefully you can fix it because the Columbus Blue Jackets just really have felt like the last 4 or 5 years are just in a status of limbo. Just really don't know what you're going to do in terms of roster makeup. So Columbus Blue Jackets at number 3 as the worst teams in the NHL for 24-25. And we're going to get into number 2 just a quick second. And before we do, if you want to go into the comments down below and you want to make a prediction on who you think the number 1 and number 2 teams are, I would appreciate that. If you also want to take the time to like this video, share it to all your friends around the world, and hit the subscribe button to our YouTube channel, it would be much appreciated as we are here on PR Connections Radio, and we are also on all major platforms at Vegas Hockey Hub. Now, moving over into number 2, we're talking about the worst teams in the NHL. And hey, does anybody remember about a year ago when the Chicago Blackhawks got the first overall pick, win the Connor Bedard sweepstakes, and Chicago Blackhawks fans were so excited. They were so happy. Chicago Blackhawks fans were like, oh my gosh, we got Connor Bedard. This is going to be the greatest thing ever. Do y'all remember that? Y'all remember when they brought over Taylor Hall and brought over guys like Nick Foligno, Corey Perry, all these established veterans to help kind of elevate Connor Bedard? Yeah, that was some fun times. Almost a year and a half later after the whole Connor Bedard situation, and entering year 2 of the Connor Bedard era. And look, Connor Bedard's a generational talent. As somebody who watches Chicago Blackhawks games, I will appreciate what Connor Bedard does. All right. He is one of the best players I have seen. I got the privilege to see Connor Bedard live when the Golden Knights and Blackhawks met up at T-Mobile Arena this past season, a few months back. And yes, he is worth the ticket admission alone. He is one of the best talents I have seen in person. But the issue that Chicago has, and weirdly enough, this is kind of similar to the Montreal Canadiens, but just worse. The Chicago Blackhawks have all these veterans. Man, they have so many veterans on this roster that overlap the good of these young and up-and-coming guys. For every Kevin Korchinski, there is a Nick Foligno. For every Alex Vlasic, there's an Alec Martinez. For every Connor Bedard, there is a Laurent Brossoit. For every young guy they have in their roster, like a Lucas Reichel or a Wyatt Kaiser, there is a Jason Dickinson. It's just the Chicago Blackhawks organization. They have so many players over the age of 30, and they're currently getting everyday minutes with the Chicago Blackhawks. They're in the roster and playing almost every single game in Chicago. And if you're a rebuilding team, I understand the perspective. But at some point, you have to start slowly getting rid of those veterans. All right, a 38-year-old like Nick Foligno, slowly start to back away from that and call up your 19-year-olds, your 21-year-olds, your 24-year-olds. All right, that's what Chicago needs to be doing. And they're doing it somewhat very slowly, but I feel like you need to fast track this because this is Chicago Blackhawks team that yet when you have Connor Bedard, one of the best generational talents we have seen the last decade. Heck, you can make an argument that he has been the generational talent since Connor McDavid, and when Connor McDavid was the most generational talent since Sidney Crosby. But this is a Chicago Blackhawks team that, Luke Richardson, very nice guy. Based off of all reports I've seen, Luke Richardson, very nice guy with Chicago Blackhawks, but he isn't the captain of this ship long term. Everyone here knows it. Whoever the next head coach is, regardless of if it's, an interim head coach turned permanent head coach, regardless if it is someone they bring in from another team next year, the Chicago Blackhawks need to bring in an established coach, someone who has been here and done it. Kyle Davidson, based off of interviews, is very intelligent. I like his hockey IQ. In fact, there was that infamous interview where a reporter was interviewing him about the Chicago Blackhawks, and he had no idea who Kyle Davidson was. That was one of my favorite interviews I saw a few years back. This is a Chicago Blackhawks team where the front office seems like they kind of have not moved on, but they've recovered from the scandal that broke a few years back. This is a Chicago Blackhawks team that seems like they have, trying to recover from when they traded away Kirby Dach to Montreal, when they, let go of the Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane era and moved into the Connor Bedard era. So the Chicago Blackhawks organization, as someone who was a Blackhawks fan when I was growing up, this is a Vegas Golden Knights team that they should kind of look at and say, well, you see Vegas, yes, they do have some young talent, but they also have an influx of guys in their prime right here, right now. The Chicago Blackhawks 4 or 5 years from now should kind of try to model what the Vegas Golden Knights did, because this is a Chicago Blackhawks team that has an influx of young talent, a good half dozen amount of players that are under the age of 25 that look like they're going to be ready soon. But you have almost a dozen players who are over the age of 30. And I do want to mention, by the way, bringing in Laurent Brossoit, bringing in Alec Martinez, you're bringing in these guys in their 30s who are going to be here for 1 or 2 years. So, yeah, Chicago Blackhawks at number 2. Anyone who's been forced to watch Chicago Blackhawks games, you probably saw this coming. But yeah, year 2 of the Connor Bedard era. And kind of hope that it ends up being different from year 1, but I'm not holding my breath. And then lastly, when we're talking about the worst teams in the NHL, there's one team left. Can you guess who it is? Can you guess who the worst team in the NHL is? Well, I'm going to give you a hint. Macklin Celebrini. The San Jose Sharks organization, and I'm going to preface this. I like Mike Grier. I think Mike Grier is a very smart general manager. And some of the moves he made in the offseason, like going out and calling up Nashville and getting Askarov, really solid move. I love what he did there. Getting Celebrini, he's not a Connor Bedard, but he is a good talent as first overall pick. Having Will Smith, having Fabian Zetterlund, like you have all these young guys that are on the roster in San Jose. But I need to know this. How many years until you start being a good team? How many years do San Jose Sharks fans in particular have to wait until you become good again? Because Mike Grier has kind of set up the blueprint for this team. He's made some solid moves. But I don't know if the coaching is great. All right, we're in year 2 of the new coaching staff, and I'm not really impressed with the said coaching staff in San Jose. Part of me feels like they needed to like kind of fire that entire coaching staff like you do in NHL 24 and just hire a brand new one. But with San Jose, I don't know if it's the coaching. I don't know if it's just, they don't have enough talent yet. If the young talent is in their prime yet, and that's the reason why. But the San Jose Sharks, watching them play, oh my. There's no nice way to say it. They look like ass. All right? The San Jose Sharks organization does not look good. Anytime they've had to play Vegas, the Vegas Golden Knights just take them behind the woodshed. Like, there's a San Jose Sharks team that when they go up against LA, go up against Vancouver, go up against Edmonton, even though going up against Calgary, they look like arguably the worst team in hockey. And you want to know why they look like the worst team in hockey? Because they are the worst team in hockey. Defense is almost non-existent. I think they have maybe one and a half defensemen. I'm being generous there. On the forward side, your top 6, you have some veterans you've tried to bring in there. I understand trying to bring in some guys to make this team better. It's not working. This team is going to be probably one of the youngest rosters in about 2 or 3 years. Hopefully that fixes it. But the San Jose Sharks organization is the worst team in the NHL. And all the future talent that's coming in, it's going to negate that statement in about 3 or 4 years. But for right now, 24-25, the San Jose Sharks are the worst team in the NHL. And so we have about 90 seconds left here on the show. Let's go over that list one more time. At number 5, for the worst teams in the NHL, I have the Anaheim Ducks. You have some young talent. You have some good players. But the amount of veterans you have on your roster feels like it's weighing it down out there in Anaheim. Number 4, Montreal Canadiens. Kent Hughes, not really impressed with his GM making. I think Martin St. Louis, great player. I really don't know how to grade his coaching ability. But hey, you have Cole Caulfield. You have Nick Suzuki. You have Lane Hudson who's coming up. Yeah, Montreal Canadiens at number 4. Number 3, Columbus Blue Jackets. I wish good luck to Don Waddle, Dean Evison. Hopefully they do well, but Columbus kind of seems like they're just, at this point. Chicago Blackhawks at number 2. You won the Connor Bedard sweepstakes. I hope I see some actual production out of it in the next couple of years. And then the San Jose Sharks. I like Mike Grier. I like what he's trying to do, but you don't have enough talent yet. And you really need to start building on that young talent out there in San Jose. So that is the 5 worst teams in the NHL here on Vegas Hockey Hub. I'm your host, Ian Kelly. And until next time, have a good one, and we'll see you later.
PR Connections Radio thanks you for watching this podcast. Check out more episodes of this show and our others at prconnectionsradio.com.